This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform. More about them later in the video. Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Cosmic Horror author and enthusiast. Check out my channel Story Rant, linked in the description. Eric Malachite, and today's video script was provided by the ever-factual Larry Holsworth. Be sure to show him some love in the comments while you tell us your favorite or least favorite thing about the Pennsylvania Turnpike, or any turnpike in the US for that matter. And get ready to deploy your likes, subscribe to the channel if you're not, and share this video with someone who loves historical content. Let's get to it. In the early days of the Republic, travel from the larger cities huddled along the eastern seaboard to the emerging towns and farms west of the Alleghenies was a daunting proposition. The mountains posed seemingly unsurpassable barriers, a pain in the ass in the summer months, and impossible during the winter. Few roads existed, and what there were existed as little more than trails once cut by migrating bison. Thank you, bison. Merchants and civic leaders in the East sought better means of transporting their goods, growing their communities, and expanding the economies of their respective states. Eagle-eared listeners may notice that all of the things listed just then involve or are related to making money. Congrats, you just leveled up. You've just discovered the secret to almost all human progress: getting paid and or laid. To make this money, they first turned to canals. The Erie Canal in New York, which we've talked about before, the Chesapeake in Ohio, in Virginia and Maryland, and in Pennsylvania, the mainline canal of the lazily named Pennsylvania Canal. The latter eventually connected Pittsburgh with Philadelphia via two canals, separated by the Allegheny Barrier, at which an ingenious portage railroad powered by stationary steam engines hauled freight and passengers over the mountain. Though it was a success and an engineering marvel for its time, the very steam which enabled its engines led to its downfall, as steam locomotives began to haul carloads across the state in much faster times. Roads traversed by animal power pulling wagon loads or carrying passengers on stages or horseback lagged behind the canals and railroads. Rural roads were, for the most part, muddy tracks. The few paved roads were often laid with logs, called corduroy roads. Yes, like the fabric, which is where the name came from, and offered a jarring ride for those traveling them. They were also potentially lethal to horses, as a single shifting log could cause the horse to become trapped, and nobody wants to see a horse's leg detonate while sitting on the equivalent of a wooden washing machine full of bricks. It just sounds like a bad time for everyone. Admittedly, by the beginning of the 20th century, a few roads were paved around urban areas, some with macadam, though some were of crushed oyster shells, rough gravel, cobblestones, and brick. Some even bore the exalted name of highway, or where they crossed private land and were maintained by private entities, turnpikes. Such was the situation when the automobile burst upon the American scene in the early 20th century. The demand for better roads grew steadily, with citizens thrilled with the freedom offered by their new automobiles seeking safer, more convenient, and more readily available travel. Their voices were joined by the leaders of industry, particularly in western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio, where steel and oil barons saw the potential for increased markets for their products. The building of new roads remained very much within the purview of the states, and local and state governments seized the opportunity, which not only offered better lives for the citizenry they served, but also presented a chance to challenge the monopolistic practices of the railroads. In Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Railroad, often referred to simply as the Pennsy, dominated rail traffic and thus rail rates. And in the 1880s, a group of businessmen decided to build a competitive line named the South Pennsylvania Railroad because they were rich, not creative, to break the Pensy's grip. Among the backers of the project were steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, railroad baron William Henry Vanderbilt, who operated the competing New York Central Railroad, and oil bigwig John D. Rockefeller himself. Together, they poured cash into the project, gaining the necessity easements across Pennsylvania and boring a series of 9 tunnels through the Alleghenies. However, in 1885, the project was basically canceled when the Pensy and Vanderbilt New York Central came to an agreement over freight rates, which proved acceptable to Carnegie, Rockefeller, and other titans of industry. The tunnels, both completed and nearly completed, were abandoned, and the easements reverted to the Commonwealth. Just to be clear, These three men and their associates were so unthinkably ruinously rich that they paid to punch half a dozen holes into a mountain and then wrote the whole thing off when they were offered a slightly better deal for carting their crap via train. If you've got an innovative idea like the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you're going to need a fancy website to get your message out. And today's sponsor, Squarespace, is just what you're looking for. Squarespace is the all-in-one website platform, perfect for entrepreneurs, whether you're an entrepreneur or a civil engineer looking to reinvent the way people travel in your country. Squarespace has all the tools you need to get the job done, all in one place and on your terms. With Squarespace's next-generation website engine, the Fluid Engine, you'll be able to choose from a template and customize it to your heart's content. And unlike using an expensive web designer, your website will be fully functional on desktop and mobile from the get-go. And now, introducing Design Intelligence, Squarespace's brand new service that combines 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with cutting-edge AI technology to unlock your strongest creative potential. Design Intelligence empowers anyone to build a beautiful, more personalized website tailored to their unique needs and craft a bespoke digital identity to use across one's entire online presence. And best of all, if you're looking to sell your wares on your website, Squarespace offers flexible payment options with simple but powerful tools, accept credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay. And in eligible countries, your customers will have the option to buy now and pay later with Afterpay and ClearPay. Ready to get started? Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/geographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And now back to the video. In the 1920s, the Weimar Republic of Germany began development of a new type of roadway, one in which vehicles had limited access and egress, multiple lanes of traffic in each direction, and smoothly paved roadbeds with adequate drainage and shoulders. The Germans called the new roadway the Autobahn. Though construction began in 1929, progress was slow, Germany being then engulfed in the Great Depression along with nearly everyone else. In 1933, the Nazis came to power and adopted the Autobahn. Despite being linked to Hitler and the Nazis, the plan intrigued engineers on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, it's not like a road can be racist, right? Karl has a note here and says, "This is a joke. Of course, roads can be racist. Never underestimate America's ability to give its black and brown citizens the short end of the stick." Moving on. By the early 1930s, trucking organizations in Pennsylvania had studied the German idea. The long-ass road thing, not any of the Nazi stuff. We hope. And in 1934, Pennsylvania State Legislature Cliff Patterson received a proposal from the Pennsylvania State Planning Commission. The latter had received the idea from William Sutherland, who represented the state's Motor Truck Association. Sutherland had extensive personal experience traversing the Alleghenies by car and truck on the challenging and often dangerous roads then in existence. He persuaded Patterson to authorize a feasibility study conducted by the Works Progress Administration, or WPA, part of the alphabet soup of New Deal agencies introduced during the administration of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Sutherland's proposal, as studied by the WPA, suggested that the route of the new turnpike should follow that of the long-defunct South Pennsylvania Railroad, including the use of the tunnels bored by that organization, which had lain abandoned for nearly 5 decades and were probably only partially filled with vampires. The WPA studied the plan, determined it to be feasible, and suggested a cost for completing a nearly 200-mile length of road would cost in the area of $70 million, roughly just over $1 billion in today's money. So, you know, super easy, barely an inconvenience. With the WPA's endorsement in hand, Patterson introduced a bill in the legislature creating the Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission, or the PTC, in 1936. The following year, the bill was signed into law, and on June 4th, 1937, the first commissioners were named. They included Patterson. The proposed first section of the turnpike was to be paid for by tolls collected from the road's users, and run from just east of Pittsburgh, where it would meet US Highway 30 and come to a terminus at US Highway 11, west of Harrisburg. Along its route, it would use the 9 abandoned railroad tunnels, at which the turnpike would be reduced to a 2-lane road in order to accommodate the narrowness of the tunnel's tubes. The plan called for a uniform design for the length of the route. The turnpike right-of-way would be 200 feet across for all 4 lanes, the shoulders and the median dividing the directional lanes. Lanes were to be 12 feet wide. This is still the standard to this day across much of America, with 10 feet assigned to the shoulders and the median. Where the turnpike compressed to enter the tunnels, the lanes were reduced to 2 lanes of 11.5 feet in width. The tunnels offered 14 feet of overhead clearance. In no place over the length of the route would the grade exceed 3%. For those not versed in road-related vernacular, grade is another way of saying steepness, so a grade of 3% means that the difference between one end of a 100-meter section of road and the other is about 3 meters. This may not sound like much, but even on modern roads on which modern cars with all their advancements in power, grip, and safety, the maximum accepted grade for a highway is about 8%. Slightly more is allowed, but only for shorter sections of road, usually in mountainous regions where construction of a less steep road wouldn't be possible. But back to the topic at hand, there were to be no cross streets, no intersections at grade, no traffic signals, and no railroad crossings at grade. Approaches to exit ramps and to service areas were to be lighted. As proposed, they would be unlike any highway then in use in America, though similar plans were in various stages of development across several states, including Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Ohio. These plans often had significant differences in approach, though. For example, Connecticut planned for access ramps to have a stoplight where the ramp met the roadway, requiring vehicles to come to a full stop before venturing onto the turnpike surface, rather than merging at speed. Some ramps even called for a gate similar to a railroad crossing gate, which allowed only one vehicle to enter at a time. The Pennsylvania Turnpike opted for merging at speed, a feature of the German Autobahn and the standard today. So yeah, suck it, Connecticut. Now, although the plan called for the turnpike to be self-supporting through the collection of tolls, the promises of payment to come were insufficient to pay for the construction. In 1938, the PTC authorized the issuance of bonds to fund construction. The first issue of bonds was in the amount of $60 million, worth just over $1 billion today. The federal government provided additional funding in the form of a grant from the WPA, which was equivalent to about $400 million in today's money. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, not to be outdone by the feds, kicked in a grant worth just under $500 million today. The government contributions allowed for a reduction in the amount of bonds necessary, and the original $60 million was reduced to $20 million, helping minimize the financial risk absorbed by the PTC. The funding enabled the PTC to demonstrate its solvency, and construction loans were in place by June 1938. At the same time the funding was being finalized and the details of the route worked out, entities opposed to the construction of the turnpike, with the backing of the Pennsy, proposed a new rail route across Pennsylvania from Harrisburg to Pittsburgh, a sort of 1930s version of high-speed rail. The route would displace the turnpike and use the long-abandoned rail tunnels, to which the Pennsy claimed title. In September 1938, the legislature voted down the railroad's proposal, one of the first times in that corporation's existence when it had failed to prevail in the halls of government. The once mighty titan of rail had simply grown too fat on the throne and allowed the burgeoning automotive and trucking interests to usurp them, and it never really recovered, as today in America, car is king. In the end, the turnpike did not use all 9 of the abandoned tunnels. 2 were bypassed during construction, not being fit for purpose. The others required extensive work. Not all of them had been completely bored through, and they required additional drilling, blasting, excavating, and shaping in order to bring them into compliance with the standards established by the PTC. There was no shortage of workers available. Over 150 companies from 18 states obtained contracts to work on the project. By early 1940, 15,000 workers were assigned to the project, providing a badly needed economic stimulus. They built an all-concrete roadway, erected guard barriers, and groomed shoulders and the median. Yet, they built far more than just roads. 10 ticket exchanges were built at interchanges where roads provided access and egress to and from the turnpike. The ticket exchanges were stations where workers would issue tickets to those entering the turnpike and collect tolls from those leaving it. Along with the ticket exchanges, workers built service plazas where future drivers could rest, refuel, and obtain additional services required by the cars of the day, such as tires, oil, water, lubrication, batteries, and other maintenance to their vehicles. They could also walk about, enjoy a meal at a full-service restaurant, or picnic outside, and otherwise refresh themselves. 10 service plazas were constructed as part of the original turnpike and leased to Standard Oil of Pennsylvania. Standard Oil provided the fuel and automotive services and leased the restaurant and shopping facilities to Howard Johnson's. Each service plaza cost about $500,000 to build, and they proved immediately popular when drivers began using the turnpike. The original turnpike spanned from the Middlesex Ticket Exchange to Irwin, 162 22 miles away. It included the 10 ticket exchanges and 10 service plazas, 7 tunnels, and a uniform, mostly level, broadly curved, all-concrete 4-lane highway. It opened on October 1st, 1940, just 23 months after construction began. It immediately became popular in a manner which its planners had not anticipated. Intended as a modern high-speed means of moving goods and passengers across the state, the Turnpike became a popular tourist destination. It was as much an attraction as it was a modern means of conveyance, in a manner similar to other roads contemporary to its development, such as Virginia's Skyline Drive. Can you imagine not wanting to go to Disneyland and instead having your kids say, "Let's go to the Pennsylvania Turnpike"? Neither can I. Traffic was relatively light, especially in comparison to later decades. Drivers flocked to the new Turnpike to enjoy its vistas, its convenient access, its spacious service centers, and its appeal as an easy road to drive on. Wide shoulders offered areas where it was possible to park just off the roadway and select pleasant sites for picnics, family games, and hikes through the woods. Others enjoyed picnics in the median separating the roadway. Yes, that section of grass between the opposing lanes. The Turnpike Authority did not sanction such activities, and the signage warned drivers that the shoulders were for emergency use only, such as breakdowns or flat tires requiring immediate attention. Yet a growing number of drivers ignored such admonitions, and for the most part, the authorities ignored the drivers, at least at first. Cars didn't really go as fast back then, so the risk of one plowing through a picnicking family at high speed was limited. Throughout 1941, the Pennsylvania Turnpike served a role similar to that of Skyline Drive in Virginia, or the Taconic Parkway in New York's Hudson River Valley. Using the car for recreation, a behavior called motoring grew in popularity. Drivers enjoying their leisure time admired the decorative entrances to the tunnels, dined outdoors while gazing at the views offered by the mountain ranges, and for the most part exploited the pleasures offered by the new roadway as if it were one of the nation's growing inventory of national and state parks. Then the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, plunging the United States into World War II. In early 1942, rationing of rubber and gasoline was introduced and driving for pleasure became taboo. Traffic on the Pennsylvania Turnpike was reduced to almost entirely commercial vehicles, delivering critical war materials to factories and shipping facilities. And the production of new automobiles was suspended for the duration of the war. Automobile traffic decreased dramatically, though truck traffic as well as the movement of military convoys increased. During the war, it became evident that despite the decrease in automobiles, that the reduction of lanes to one in each direction to traverse the tunnels was the source of undesirable bottlenecks. Plans were developed for widening the tunnels either by increasing the bore of the existing tubes or by building new parallel tubes alongside those in place. Planning also went forward to expand the turnpike in each direction, to the Ohio state line in the west and to Philadelphia in the east, with additional spurs to other cities connected to the main line across the state. Post-World War II saw an immediate explosion in traffic along the Turnpike, as well as across the rest of the United States. New cars returned, rationing came to an end, and cheap gasoline made traveling by car, either for business or pleasure, a viable option for the emerging middle class. Many of the habits formed before the war, such as picnicking along the shoulders of the roadway or in its median, returned as well. Increased traffic volume made such activities far more dangerous than they had been pre-war. The Turnpike Commission noted with alarm an increase in accidents along the Turnpike, especially in head-on collisions that the divided highway had been designed to avoid. These were usually the result of drivers entering or exiting the median, which just sounds like a terrible idea. The Turnpike Commission responded with increased enforcement of regulations, designating the median and shoulders as available for emergency use only. When that action failed to significantly reduce the number of accidents, in part because Americans have always been less than receptive to traffic regulations, the commissioner began the construction of barriers along the median. Some were wooden posts connected with cables, others were of native stone, and still others were steel barriers. All were separated at intervals by throughways designated for use by emergency and maintenance vehicles only. Reversing direction by use of the throughways was made punishable with fines, along with a fee equivalent to that of driving the length of the entire turnpike, rather than just the amount signified by entrances and exits. Speeds were set in the tunnels and across all bridges at 45 miles per hour. The rest of the turnpike was unencumbered by speed limits, at least for a short time in the 1940s. By 1951, speed limits, usually 55 miles per hour, were in effect across the system, reduced in the tunnels and construction zones. The Dominic Torettos of the 50s were not impressed by these measures and continued to fast and furious along the road for as long as they were able to get away with it. The late 1940s and early 1950s saw a flurry of construction activity, with the turnpike expanding to the east and west. The western extension from Irwin to the Ohio state line was completed in late 1951. The westernmost terminus of the turnpike was set at the Gateway Exchange, opening on the day after Christmas 1951. To the east, the turnpike pushed toward Philadelphia, acquiring needed land through the process of condemnation by eminent domain. In New Baltimore, Pennsylvania, the constructors encountered land that could not be acquired through such a process. The Catholic Church of St. John the Baptist owned land that the turnpike would need to pass through, which included a cemetery. State law prohibited the acquisition of a cemetery via eminent domain, meaning, yes, you have more rights to the land you're on when you're dead than when you're alive. America. Eventually, a compromise was reached which met the needs of both church and state. The Turnpike Commission built a stone staircase from the shoulder of the roadway up the mountain to the church. Another staircase was built on the opposite side of the road with an elevated walkway connecting the stairs. The staircases permitted access to the church, which posted signs depicting times for Mass and confession. Motorists could park, attend Mass, cleanse their souls through the sacrament of penance or whatever, and then continue along their journey. The stairs have long been closed to pedestrians, but they remain in place, easily visible, as is the church, to drivers along the turnpike. Philadelphia was connected to the turnpike in stages in the late 1950s and in 1956, following a years-long joint venture between the Pennsylvania Turnpike and their worthy counterparts in New Jersey, the Delaware River Bridge was completed. The 1950s also saw the first repaving of the original sections of the Pennsylvania Turnpike, a process which has continued more or less on various sections ever since. In the 1960s, 3 of the original tunnels were abandoned, with the roadway moved to bypass them. The longest tunnel on the turnpike at the time, the Sidling Tunnel, was one of those abandoned. Its retirement made the Allegheny Mountain Tunnel, at 6,070 feet, the longest on the turnpike, as well as the longest in the state. In the early 21st century, all 4 of the remaining tunnels were under consideration for replacement through bypassing them. When the turnpike opened, one of the many names by which it was known was as the Highway of Tunnels. It seems that moniker, like the tunnels themselves, will eventually fall into the ash heap of history. But, there you go. The Pennsylvania Turnpike, like all multi-lane highways in the United States, requires slower traffic to use the right-hand lane, with the left lane reserved for passing slower vehicles except where otherwise signed, such as in preparing for a left exit. On July 5, 1953, Pennsylvania State Trooper Manly Stampler observed a late-model Chrysler New Yorker camped in the left lane westbound near Bedford. The New Yorker was obeying the speed limit, then 55 miles per hour, but was nonetheless causing a lengthy backup of traffic in its wake. Stampler decided to investigate. After pulling the big Chrysler over, Stampler was no doubt astonished to discover the driver was none other than Harry Truman, who had only 7 months earlier been President of the United States. The only person with the former president was his wife, Bess, who reportedly refused to allow her husband, once the most powerful man in the world, to exceed the speed limit by as much as 1 mile per hour. Her edict had prevented Harry from finding an opening to return to the right lane. There is debate whether Truman received a citation for impeding traffic. Some sources state he did, while Stampler said he did not. Truman's traffic stop remains the only known such incident involving a former American president, save for that time President Grant was arrested for speeding, though he did so in a horse-drawn carriage, which is slightly different and a story for another time. There are other unusual aspects to the Turnpike. Today, the Turnpike carries portions of 4 interstate highways, I-76, 70, 276, and the dreaded 95. Although for significant distances, it is not currently up to interstate standards. Lane widths, bridges, access ramps, and other issues mean the roadway and supporting infrastructure require upgrades. There is also Breezewood, exit 161 on the Turnpike, the last remaining section of interstate east of the Mississippi River, which includes traffic lights, cross streets at grade, and direct access to and from parking lots. These service plazas still offer fuel, but little else in the way of automotive services beyond what drivers can provide for themselves. The Howard Johnsons are long gone. There are 15 service plazas in 2024 offering fast food, vending machines, a convenience market, restrooms, tourist plazas, picnic tables, cell phone charging stations, lottery tickets, and many of the other accoutrements of modern life. No one says accoutrements. In the early 2000s, the Turnpike proudly claimed to be the first in the nation to offer more than one fast food chain at its service plazas, a dubious distinction at best, but one emblematic of the tireless march of time. The plazas had originally been built to reflect local history and architecture. Many were built of stone, reflecting the heritage of stone houses built by the Pennsylvania Dutch. Today, after rebuilds and remodeling, it is no longer the case. McDonald's demands conformity, damn it. The ticket exchanges are gone too. Where once it was possible to have a brief conversation with an attendant in which a driver could learn of weather or traffic conditions ahead, today a driver enters the Turnpike to have his vehicle scanned electronically, either through EasyPass or a license plate scanner system. Another job stolen by a heartless, infinitely more efficient machine. When the Turnpike opened in 1940, the only speed limits were found in the tunnels, where drivers were restricted to 45 miles per hour. World War II saw the first system-wide limits, which met the national mandate of 35 miles per hour. Jeez, that's slow. Since then, the limits have varied, with many years set at 55 miles per hour due to that figure being established as the national limit. Today, the speed limit varies, with the highest allowed being 70 miles per hour. However, factors such as road construction, congested areas, bridges, narrowed lanes, shifted lanes, and other factors encountered on modern American roads reduces the speed limit in many areas. Driving the length of the Turnpike at 70 miles per hour is impossible, at least legally speaking. Hold my beer. The system is under constant modernization and rebuilding, which, although holds promise for future generations, remains a constant source of irritation for drivers contending with construction projects, which seemingly go on forever, traffic jams, billing errors, and other foibles. These issues and steadily increasing tolls have caused an actual decrease in the use of the Turnpike, as drivers seek alternative routes through Maryland and West Virginia, which offer newer roads, higher speeds, and no tolls. Considerations for the future include the installation of electric charging pads in parking spaces beginning in 2023 to supplement charging stations installed at the service plazas. Another is the installation of an electric charging station of pavement in which EVs obtain a charge while traveling over the road. This system is experimental, under development in partnership with the Ohio Turnpike, and will include a section of electrified roadway in both Ohio and Pennsylvania. These projects and others involving electric vehicles point to their exploitation as a potential new revenue stream for the Turnpike through the sale of electricity, as well as helping to achieve reduced carbon emissions. Despite being now in its mid-80s chronologically speaking, the Pennsylvania Turnpike continues to look forward. How that future transpires is anyone's guess. But for the time being, it's safe to assume drivers will continue to exploit a safe, efficient, and affordable means of traversing the state and continuing on to destinations of their choosing. One day in the future, today's version of the Turnpike will appear as quaint and dated to users as the 1940s version does to users today. I hope you learned something today, and if you dug today's video, be sure to deploy your likes, comment your favorite or least favorite thing about driving, subscribe to the channel if you aren't, and share this video with someone who loves learning about places and the fascinating history behind them. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.